We have seen the last several weeks, John just building and building and building this case to state that Jesus is the Messiah, and it's indisputable. But it continues to pile on top of it. He's not satisfied. He continues. We've seen 3 signs, 3 miracles so far. And today we're going to look at number 4, number 5 that he gives to us. And we've seen witnesses. Jesus Christ himself gives us witnesses as to the works he's done, and to John who came before him, and the Old Testament, how it preaches of him, and the Father himself testifies, this is my Son. And as he builds this evidence in his case for Jesus being Messiah becomes stronger and stronger, and we understand that. And what we look at today will be 2 very familiar miracles, but they still have so much to say to us. So I'm going to ask you if you'll join me in your copy of God's Word in John chapter 6, and we'll look at the first 21 verses there. John chapter 6, beginning in verse 1 reads, "After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on a mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, 'Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?' And he said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, 'There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?' Jesus had the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. So when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, 'Gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost.' So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments, with 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the signs that he had done, they said, 'This indeed is a prophet who is come into the world.' Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force and make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. And he said to them, 'It is I, do not be afraid.' Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going." So after this, and really it's about between 6 and 12 months since the last episode we were seeing where Jesus has been confronted by the Jewish leaders of his day, these religious leaders who challenged him on his claims to be the Son of God. Despite the miracles that they had to attest to, they could not accept this idea that someone so poor and timid and seemingly pitiful could be anything like the Messiah they were looking for. And he had been in the south around Jerusalem. Now he is back in the north around Galilee. And this is where he continues the work that he's doing. And as he moves away from the most inhabited areas and he comes up to an area around the sea, and he's kind of up on the side of a mountain with his disciples, and they're sitting there and they're kind of just talking probably amongst themselves, and Jesus is probably teaching them. And this huge crowd is following him. But why? Because of what they've seen. They've watched him heal people time and time again. There is not the nearest notion of any kind of a spiritual connection, of any kind of a real, genuine faith in him. They want to see it show. This guy's done some pretty cool stuff. We want to see more. And so they follow him. A massive crowd of people lurching around behind him wherever he goes. And as he's sitting this side of this mountain, he's got a great vantage point, and he looks up and he sees this crowd coming at him. And he turns to Philip. "Hey, Philip, look at all these people coming. They're going to be hungry, Philip. What are we going to do for food for all these people?" And I can just imagine Philip's response. It's like, are you kidding me? There's no way. And he's looking across this number where we find out that there's 5,000 men. Some put the estimate as high as 20,000 when you include all the women and the children and such. It's a gigantic crowd there. And he's asking him, hey, let's give these people something to eat. And Philip comes back with this concept of, if we had 200 denarii, which is estimated around 8 months' wages, 200 denarii, we couldn't buy enough to give everybody a small little bite. There's just no way. You can't be serious, Jesus. But Jesus said this to test him. Jesus already knew the answer. He already had the solution. It was all figured out and worked out. He wanted to know what Philip would say when he asked him. Now, Andrew comes along and says, hey, you know what? There is this kid here. He's got a couple of fish. He's got a little bit of bread. But even in his statement, he's like, it's ludicrous. We couldn't even feed the front row with this little bit of food. Jesus, your request doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And it's as if they hadn't seen all the miracles that he performed over and over again. It's as if they're standing there and say, you know, if only there was someone here who could perform miracles. And when Jesus stands right there next to them, and although they have seen what Jesus has done, they really haven't seen it. They really just don't get it. It doesn't come to mind to them to say, hey, this is something different. He's got a crowd here that has followed him out of, honestly, nothing more than curiosity. I mean, it's kind of a shameful thing that they're just there because they're curious. That's all it's about. Back in the late 70s when John Madden was still coaching football, Jim Tunney comes along. He's one of the referees in the NFL. And he says to him, he says, you know what, I'm glad you're here refereeing today. He says, you're probably the second best referee in the whole NFL. Well, that's very nice of you. We really appreciated the thought. And the game gets started, but Tunney's curiosity gets the better of him. And he begins to wonder, he begins to think. He goes back to Matt and he says, hey, you said I was probably the second best, which I really appreciate, but who is it that you think is really the best? It's a tie between the other 89 referees in the league. Curiosity can lead us to wonderful places. Curiosity can take us to most horrible places. The curiosity drove this huge crowd to follow Jesus. And Jesus said, hey, let's feed them. And his disciple thinks he's lost his mind because they think very small. They're looking for human solutions to a God-sized problem. Well, how much money would it take? And what food can we find here? None of that was ever going to fix the problem they had. None of it was ever going to do it for them. They needed a God-sized answer. Jesus takes the little bit of food that they've got here, and he tell everybody to sit down. Jesus is about to go to work. And they get this massive crowd to sit down across the grass down there at the base of that mountain that he was sitting on. And he takes that little bit of food and he thanks God for that food. And I think it's much more than, hey, just thank you for this meal we're about to eat. I believe it is a thanking God for the glory that he's about to bring himself. That he's about to show these people the reality of who he is in such a magnificent feat. You see, we have the synoptic gospels. I've told you before, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They tell basically all the same stories. They have nuances, little intricacies that are slightly different, but for the most part, they're lined up. John is different. John tells us different accounts. He tells us different things that we don't normally see. But something interesting about this feeding of the 5,000 is the only miracle we see in all 4 Gospels. I think it must mean something. I think it must be important if that's the case. God is wanting us to see something in this feeding of the people. And as he thanks God for the food, he blesses this food, and he begins to start handing it out. And I see this huge crowd all seated on the grass around them, and these 12 disciples who are running back and forth, they get more food, and they take it and hand it out. And they come and get more food, and they hand it out. And the more they come and hand it out, more they take, the more Jesus just keeps handing out. And it just keeps coming and keeps coming and keeps coming. You remember Philip had the idea, we could spend a lot of money and come up with a little bit to get everybody a little bite. But when they finished, everybody there is completely full. They're sitting around with their guts stuck out. Everybody's just happy because their bellies are full. What an amazing thing. But they had thought so small. See, this is, what Jesus works is not the dollar menu kind of stuff. This is an all-you-can-eat buffet. And he lays it out there on them. And in fact, he says, don't leave anything left over. Go get all the what's left and what he's eating and bring it back. And I think there's a couple of reasons he was so interested in collecting that. One, as the people of God, we are to be stewards of what he's given us, of his resources, of not wasting them. At the same time, I think Jesus wanted them to see it wasn't just enough to feed all these people. If it's 5, 15, 20,000 people, we fed everybody. They're all full, and there's still 12 baskets left over. Just to show you how much he's done. That little bit of fish and a little bit of little loaves could have never fed all those people, but it's exactly the amount that Jesus needed to show who he truly is. It is God who brings the increase. In 2 Kings chapter 4, we see the account of a lady, and she goes to Elijah the prophet. And she says, Elijah, it's terrible. She says, my husband has died. 2 of my kids have been taken away because we're in such debt that they've been taken into slavery to pay our debt off. And she says, I have nothing. And there are no ways to make a living, nothing that she can do about it. And he goes, what do you have? She says, the only thing I have is a jar full of oil. He says, you go to your neighbors and you get every empty jar that you can get, any vessel, anything you can get your hands on, you go borrow it right now. And so she takes her other 2 kids and they go out and they start knocking on all the doors. And they're hitting up all the neighbors and if you've got a jar, I need it. And they bring it all the house. He says, take all that in your house. And he says, you start pouring. Okay. And she takes and she pours until the first jar is full. And it's still coming. So give me another jar. And they keep doing this. We'll give you another jar. And another one is full. And another one is full. And they keep going until she finally tells her, give me another jar. It's still coming. And they said, there is no more. You filled them all up. And then the oil stopped. And she goes and tells Elijah what happened. And he goes, take the oil that you need, go pay your debts, get your children back, and then you and your kids live off the rest of it. It is God who brings the increase. He takes what we have and he multiplies it. In fact, he just exponentially just explodes the things that are in front of us. This is the 4th sign that Jesus has done with the feeding of all these people. And from this, they think that he's a prophet. It goes back to Deuteronomy chapter 18, where Moses says, there's one coming after me that God will raise up from among you. He will be the prophet, and you shall listen to him. And that's what the people are looking for, this prophet. We've got to have this prophet. And when he shows up, it's going to fix everything. Well, it is who Moses was talking about, but just not in the way that they thought. And so Jesus goes up on the mountainside, and he tells the crowd, you guys go away. You got to go home or go somewhere else. He tells the disciples, go get in a boat and you take off across the sea. But only John tells us why. Because they see him as this miracle-working guy, and they want to make him king. We're going to take you, we're going to put you in Jerusalem, and you're going to lead us to kick out the Romans, and it's going to be a great time. We're going to take this country back again. We're going to restore it back to the glory days of when David was on the throne. It's going to be awesome. That's not why Jesus came. He is a king, but he's not an earthly king. He is a heavenly king. And he didn't come here to fight Romans. He knew if David started that, it would be a bloodbath. The Romans did not take to anybody raising up against their rule. And they put any kind of rebellion down quickly. And they would have destroyed a lot of people. He didn't come to fight Rome. He came to fight sin. He came to fight death. They're still thinking very small when God has very big plans. This is not about an earthly kingdom. This is about a heavenly kingdom. This is not about beating Romans. This is about beating death. And this is what Jesus came for. So he says, you guys have to go, send the disciples away, and he goes up on the mountain by himself to pray. He's putting this down. I'm not having any of this. Because of their viewpoint was wrong. They thought too small. They thought very tiny, and they thought Jesus would be their puppet, that he would do their bidding. And they would follow him as long as he did what they wanted him to do. But how different are we? We follow Jesus as long as it's easy, right? As long as he doesn't ask too much of us. We want the kingdom without the king. We want the blessing without the commitment. We want the riches of his glory without him asking anything from us for it. And this is what these people are after. And this is what they say. Now, John moves quickly to the next one in verse 16 as he sees him. These disciples are rowing across the sea, and they're out in the boat in the middle of the sea there, and they're 3 or 4 miles from land. And the wind, as it often would, because of the elevation of this water, because of the mountains around it, a lot of times you would get these wind currents that would come across, and you would get these horrible storms that would just come up out of nowhere. And it's pushing against them. The waves are terrible, and it's in the wee hours of the morning, so it's really dark outside. And as they're struggling against this boat, trying to get across the sea, Jesus just comes walking out. He's just going to walk to the other side. It's just crazy. I'm just going to walk on top of the water. And we know what happens. Panic ensues. You've got these 12 guys in this boat, and they see somebody walking on water, and they lose it. It is just total freak out of these guys. They're thinking it's crazy. Now, here's the part that bothers me. You've seen Jesus heal all these people. You've seen him turn water into wine. You've seen him heal an official's son from 16 miles away. You've seen him take an invalid who hasn't walked in 38 years, and now he's walking around and running around. And all these other people, and you just watched him feed 5,000, maybe 20,000 people with a handful of food, and you think walking on water is weird. Just doesn't make any sense. At this point, you got to realize that Jesus is who he says he is, and he can do anything. That he can go anywhere, that he is capable of anything far beyond what we could ever believe is even possible. I want to take you back. I want to take you back to when we were kids. When we were kids, our imaginations would let us do anything. We had spaceships that looked a lot like a cardboard box. And we'd go to far off distant planets. And we would see creatures there that looked a lot like our pet dog or cat. We had laser guns that looked a lot like a stick, jetpacks, anything else you could imagine. Our imaginations would take us anywhere. Anything was believable. There were far-off lands with castles and kings and queens and a moat and a wall, and we would fight off the invaders, and we would tackle dragons and dismember them. We knew we could fly with a cape around our neck that looked a lot like a towel from inside the house. We could run faster than anyone. We were stronger than anybody, and we would fight crime until the end of the day when we had to go inside. Our imaginations would carry us. If we could see it, we would believe it. We would think it was possible. It was so much fun. But somewhere along the way, we grew up. Somewhere along the way, we got old. And I don't mean age. I mean our minds got old. Our spirits, they got old. And what if was replaced by that can never happen. Our imaginations gave way to cynicism. And all the wonder of the world, when we thought anything was possible, came to be known as that can never happen. That'll never work. It can't happen here. It's just not possible. It's just not the way things are done. You just don't understand it. It's different here. And when the point that we thought and believed anything was possible, and now we're kind of place we don't hardly think anything is possible anymore. We just don't get it like we did. We've given all that up. And we've done the same thing with God. When we were kids, God could do anything. God was awesome. He was capable of moving mountains if he wanted to. And we're convinced that he made everything out of nothing. And nothing could stop God because he was the best. But even in that, we got old. And we began to doubt and question. It's just not that way anymore. It's just don't believe it anymore. We won't say those words, but our actions show it. Just don't see it. It's just not possible. Things just don't work like that. Folks, the God of our childhood is still the God of our adulthood. And he still works miracles. He still does wonderful things. And he can still move mountains, and he can move among his people. And there's nothing that he can't accomplish. I believe, without question, that God wants to do amazing things in this church. I think he wants to do things that even our imaginations couldn't come up with. I think he wants to do things that our wildest dreams couldn't contain. But God doesn't work among a faithless people. And we have to believe. We have to see God for who he truly is. Jesus worked here not because of their faith. He worked in spite of their faith or a lack of it. We have to raise up and say, you know what? All things are possible with God. We're not going to accept the way it is. We're not just going to go along because it's just the easy thing to do, but we're going to look to God and say, God, we've got plans, but we know yours are way bigger. And we know that you can accomplish them. It is a matter of faith. It's a matter of not thinking small anymore. Most of you probably remember Ross Perot, billionaire, ran for president, started off with $1,000 and ended up with a billion-dollar company. Several years ago, early 90s, he was going to go around and buy up small tech companies to add to his portfolio, right? He found a 23-year-old man named Gates. Bill Gates had a little company called Microsoft. Gates wasn't interested in selling it, but he offered him a majority share in it, between $40 and $60 million. He said, I'll sell it to you, this major share in it. Ross Perot said, no way, it's too much. He now says one of the worst mistakes he's ever made, as Microsoft is $800 billion company now, blew that one. He thought too small. We don't live small. God doesn't do small things. God does big things, and he expects his people to come along because, like Philip, he's testing us. When God raises up these things in front of us, he's looking to see what we will do with them. We continue to look for man-sized answers, or we be willing to say, God, I know you've got a bigger answer, and I know it's about you. In the midst of this storm, Jesus shows up and says, it's I, don't be afraid. He brings calm to these churning waters and these violent winds. He brings rest to his disciples. It was about faith. They were glad to take him in. There was a couple that, Moffats, they were in foreign land doing missionary work, and for 10 years, 10 long years they labored, and nothing. Not one convert in 10 years. Even the missionary board that had sent them there began to question, you know what, maybe this wasn't the best idea. We'll pull you back and we'll send you somewhere else. And they refused. They said, absolutely not. We believe there's still work to be done here. And for another year or two, they go on. Still nothing. And one day they get a letter from a lady from home, and she says, I want to give you something. What do you need? What would help you right now? And they write her back, and they say, we want a communion set. We want a communion set. You don't have a church. What do you need a communion set for? But see, anyone else would think very small. Well, that would be a waste because we don't have anybody here yet to even do that with. But they wanted that. From the time that letter went back to the lady and before the communion set got back again, 6 people in that land came to know Jesus Christ right there with them. They had a church. And even though the communion set was delayed getting there, it arrived the day before they needed it. And they shared the Lord's Supper together. Because they refused to see defeat. They refused to think in man-sized terms. Instead, look to God and say, God, we know you're going to do something here. And in faith, they asked for something that didn't make sense, that didn't seem possible. And yet God used that. And he changed the life of these people here to make them something that they had never been before. This morning, where have you connected with Jesus? Is it a curiosity? Just to see what he'll do next? Are you along for the ride as long as it's easy and comfortable? Or is there a genuine faith within you that looks to Jesus for everything and holds upon him as your hope? 2 fish and 5 loaves is all he needed. So whatever you had this morning, he can use it. In fact, he wants to use it. So don't feel like you don't have enough to offer, you don't have anything to give. Because Jesus takes exactly what we've got and he makes it and he multiplies it and he brings the increase to it because of that. He can do far more than we could ever imagine. Far more than we could ever dream. If we stop thinking small and we step out in faith even though it doesn't make sense. Lord knows it didn't make any sense for Noah to build a boat where there was no water. Yet for 120 years he labored, knowing someday God was going to use that. Just a simple man and his family. We've got to stop limiting God and start living for God.